Hello everybody, it's Hater. Welcome back to another Destiny 2 build video. And last time we talked about how Starfire Protocol, Touch of Flame, and Witherhoard was able to give us an infinite source of fusion grenades that not only exploded twice, but caused the enemies to ignite and deal a massive amount of damage. Since releasing that video, a few things happened. I not only was able to get the missing mods I needed from the artifact, but the community also completed 20 million containments, meaning we now have access to the missing fragments for Solar 3.0. So what this means for today's video is we're pretty much talking about the same exact fusion grenade build, except we're pushing it to its limits with what I like to call fusion grenade perfected. And to basically reiterate last video, if you don't know how Starfire Protocol works, its exotic perk, Fusion Harness, is going to give you 2 fusion grenades and recharge those fusion grenades whenever you deal empowered weapon damage. Then fully recharge your rift energy whenever you get a kill with said fusion grenade. This basically means while you are standing inside of an empowering rift or a well of radiance, this could be your own or another teammate's, any weapon damage dealt inside of it is gonna give you energy back to your fusion grenades. Meaning if we use a weapon like Witherhoard, for example, it is a grenade launcher that applies a DOT effect when you hit enemies. This DOT effect is considered weapon damage, meaning you can have this applied to an enemy and use whatever you want while gaining infinite fusion grenades. It doesn't stop there though, because of the new features on Solar 3.0 Warlock, aka both Touch of Flame and the Ignite effect is gonna further enhance that damage overall. The aspect Touch of Flame is gonna cause your fusion grenades to explode twice. When your fusion grenades explode, they also apply the Scorch debuff, meaning they're gonna take a stackable burn over time that will turn into an explosion called Ignite. This is gonna be the overall foundation of the entire build. We lay an empowering rift or well of radiance, hit an enemy with Witherhoard, and then just start whipping fusion grenades while we have another weapon going at the same time. But to now talk about the new stuff that'll be introduced into this build, we need to start off with the new fragments. And the first one, Ember of Char, is basically going to spread Scorch to nearby enemies whenever something ignites. This is as good as it sounds, because now whenever we hit a boss or any kind of single target with our fusion grenades, they're eventually going to ignite after the second one and spread burning DOT effects to every enemy in its nearby radius, basically turning our fusion grenades into mini nukes. Something else that is new we'll be adding to this build is a weapon with the perk Incandescence. If you're not familiar with this perk at all, basically what it does is whenever you get a kill with this weapon, it'll spread Scorch effects to every enemy in the nearby radius. Basically the exact same thing as Ember of Char minus the ignition. Currently, there are 4 kinetic weapons that can roll this perk. The one that I'm currently using the most is a Callus mini tool. It's a great feeling solar SMG, but if you want something different, the Staccato Scout Rifle, Strident Whistle Bow, and Drang Baroque are all able to roll this perk. But back to the fragments now. The other new fragment we're able to use in this build is Ember of Empyrean. This is going to allow us to extend the duration of restoration and radiant effects whenever we get a kill with a solar weapon or ability final blows. Yeah, extend it. So if you recall, we just talked about solar incandescent weapons with Ember of Char. If you're picking up what I'm throwing down, we have more explosive capabilities with a bunch of solar weaponry that will extend the duration on both restoration and radiant buffs. Meaning we don't have to cater towards using healing rifts anymore and just use classy restoration with empowering rifts. The other thing that I did want to talk about that is different from last video is our heavy weapon. In the last video, I did a damage test against Phrygia using a linear fusion rifle with the build. This was able to put out 1.6 million damage even on a sloppy run. Something that a lot of people commented in the comment section on that video was for me to use a Demolitionist rocket launcher instead of a linear fusion rifle. So I did exactly just that, and pulled out my Hothead Adept with Demolitionist on it. Just like last video, the moment that the crystal finishes charging, I throw a grenade and I lay Well of Radiance. This time I shoot a rocket, and every single time that I throw a grenade, I shoot another rocket. But because of how slow the timing is on getting Demolitionist to proc, I do have to stow it every now and again to then shoot it again whenever I have a fusion grenade up. Something else that you might notice is that I'm a little sloppy with the damage combo, and I do miss a lot of timing to shoot even more rockets. But after the damage phase is over, which it should be now, I jump off the map, and I was able to put out 1.7 million damage. Something else that I do want to note is that my Hothead doesn't even have any damage perks that increase its damage. The main ones I can think of is Vorpal Weapon, Explosive Light, or Lasting Impression. If I had any of those along with Demolitionist on this rocket launcher, this build would easily put out more than 2 million damage compared to the 1.6 using a linear fusion rifle. However, now that I've confidently spent about 6 minutes talking about what's new and what's old in this build, let's finally move into talking about how we're setting this build up itself. And the first thing we're going to start off with is the aspects and fragments to use in this build. Starting with the aspects, as we mentioned earlier, the first aspect you'll be using is Touch of Flame. This is going to give your fusion grenades a second explosion. But as for the other aspect, I personally like using Icarus Dash. It simply just allows you to use a dash in the air. But on top of the extra mobility that it offers you, next week when Solar 3.0 subclasses are going to receive buffs, this is also going to cure you every single time you get rapid defeats with either your weapons or your abilities when airborne. So if there wasn't already enough restoration or healing in this build, this is going to give you even more on the next patch. Moving down over to the fragments though, starting off with the ones we already talked about earlier, Ember of Char and Ember of Empyrean, we're going to be using both of them. As for the other fragments though, we're going to be using Ember of Ashes. This is going to apply more Scorch stacks to targets every single time that we apply Scorch to them. Pairs exceptionally well with everything in our build, meaning our fusion grenades are going to apply more Scorch stacks, our ignitions are going to apply more Scorch stacks from Ember of Char, and our Incandescent is also going to apply even more Scorch stacks. You literally can't go wrong with this one. And then the last fragment is Ember of Solace. This is going to increase both the duration of Radiant and Restoration effects applied to us. So Radiant buff is going to last 15 seconds, and Restoration is going to last 12 seconds. Pretty self-explanatory. Moving now on over to the armor, this is where it's going to get interesting because we're going to break down pretty much every single mod and the energies we'll be using in this build. To start off, you're going to need at least one piece of armor arc. I recommend that it's your Starfire Protocol, and then 2 pieces of armor that are solar. Starting off over at the helmet, mine is arc, and we're going to be using Font of Might. Font of Might is going to give you 25% more damage to your weapons that match your subclass type whenever you pick up a elemental well matching your subclass's energy. This is going to pair really nicely with our incandescent weapons so that they're not only receiving the buffs from Radiant if any of our teammates are using Radiant, our Empowering Rift, or even our Well of Radiance. This will stack with them no matter what for even more damage. Moving on over to the arms, this is the first piece of armor that I have as solar. In it, we're going to be using Explosive Wellmaker. Explosive Wellmaker is going to create a solar elemental well whenever we get rapid kills with explosive damage. So this goes for our Witherhoard's Puddle, our fusion grenades, our melee, our ignitions, pretty much literally anything in our kit that does explosive damage. This is going to act as our main resource of the entire build and use it for empowering effects like Well of Life or Font of Might. Something else that I do want to note is I'm using overload rounds for my SMG because it also innately lowers damage output of any enemy we attack with them, meaning in the long run even more survivability. But moving down over to the chest piece, this is the one that I recommend you have arc because of the brand new mod Armor of the Dying Star. This is basically going to reduce the incoming damage of both solar and void. So the reason we run arc as our energy is to use the arc resistance mod along with it, so we take reduced damage from all 3 energy types. And then the extra bonus thing that we can use along with this, since it's arc, is Seeking Wells. This is going to make all of the elemental wells that we create travel across the ground and come to us instead of us going to them, making it a lot more consistent, gaining the buffs like Well of Life and Font of Might. Speaking of which, moving down over to the boots, this is the second armor piece that I have solar, and we're using the mod Well of Life as I mentioned earlier. This is going to give us constant healing for 10 seconds whenever we pick up a solar elemental well. This also synergizes with the restoration effects that we'll have along with the build, meaning we're even harder to kill on top of really high resilience and the restoration effect in and of itself. Finally though, moving on over to the class item. It's not going to matter what energy type you have this armor, because what you're going to have inside of it is 2 artifact mods. The first one is Classy Restoration. This is the most powerful artifact mod in the entire game right now. What it does is whenever you activate your solar class ability, you gain restoration, meaning every time that we activate our empowering rift, we gain 10 seconds of extreme constant healing that can't be interrupted. This is basically going to render healing rifts completely useless now, because what it does is what healing rift does, but better. Minus the overshield, of course. The only time that I ever decided to use a healing rift with Classy Restoration was my solo flawless of the Duality dungeon, specifically in the second encounter where there is a bunch of ads. Also, if you remember earlier, the Fragment Ember of Empyrean is gonna synergize with this because it is a restoration effect, meaning every single time that we get kills with our solar abilities or any of our incandescent weapons, it'll extend the restoration effect of Classy Restoration over and over and over again until it runs out. Pretty much meaning we have infinite restoration, because Starfire Protocol is going to give us a free rift every time we get a kill with our fusion grenade, and our fusion grenades and weapons are going to extend the duration of Classy Restoration. But now for the other mod that we're using with Classy Restoration, it is Solar Fulmination. This is going to increase the damage and radius of our ignitions, meaning we're dealing more damage overall, and we're spreading the scorch effects from Ember of Char from a further range. Overall though, that is going to be the build for today's video. This is by far my favorite build in the entire game, and what I think is the best build for Solar 3.0 Warlock in the entire game. So if you do have any questions about the build, please leave them down in the comments. I'll answer them as fast as I humanly can. Plus, if you enjoy the build and you found this video helpful, then give the video a like. And if you enjoy the type of content that I put out, consider subscribing to the channel so you'll never miss out on a new build video. Overall though, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. I'm going to catch you in the next one. Bye bye.